Hello and welcome to Stephen Davis year-end edition for 1973. We've already talked about January through June. So this time around, we're going to be looking at the second half of the year, July through December. Steve, what's happening in July?
Well, first day of July, the Drug Enforcement Administration is created by the Nixon administration. They carved it carved out a piece of the Justice Department of Justice for it. The DEA then will become the kind of the flagship organization, if you will, for Nixon's war on drugs. This was a key administration focal point, right? The idea of getting tough on drugs. This was, and it extended. I mean, the drug piece of it was important. It was also a kind of war on the counterculture. And
well,
so
I was just going to say, right, because it's also like a talking point for the administration.
Oh, it's 100%. And it had been something that Nixon had promised his base, the so-called silent majority, that he would put together. And again, as Nixon is wont to do in this era, he delivers on his promises, interestingly enough, both to the left and to the right. On the 7th of July, Nixon informs one Sam Ervin, the chair of the Watergate Select Committee, that he would not be appearing. I don't think there was really much of a hope that Nixon would, but I think the committee was open to a Nixon testimony, but that wasn't happening. I've got another thing that happened on the 12th that's a little bit more unusual, and that is that there are sort of two big events in the archival history of the United States that are really noteworthy. One is that happened in the 1920s when almost all of the 1890 census burned. So if you look for census data from 1890, there's almost none of it exists because it all went up in a warehouse fire in, I think it was 1922. The second big event happened on the 12th of July in 73, and that is you can see here in the image, the National Personnel Records Center in Missouri, Overland, Missouri, went up in flames. And estimated 80% of all veteran records between 1912 and 1960 were lost, and they weren't backed up. This again, paper records,
right?
And so, if you think about this, this is This is World War I, this is World War II, this is Korea, and all up in flames. Again, it may seem a minor deal, but to historians in particular, it was catastrophic. It was just catastrophic.
Well, what does that mean for your veteran benefits and stuff like that?
Well, I get things got confused. I mean, I think that's fair, it's just one of those things that, I mean, it's clearly archival storage has changed dramatically over the years. But the idea of just warehouses full of paper records is, we don't see that much anymore. On the 6th,
it's amazing the way we have as many records as we do when you consider all it takes to wipe out volumes is a spark, right? And
that's 100%. No, I agree with you completely. On the 16th, the Watergate committee called Alexander Butterfield, who was at this point the head of the Federal Aviation Agency, but prior to this was a Nixon insider. They brought him to testify. He was there for a couple of days. Butterfield was wondering if he would be asked about this, and eventually the committee came around to it. It was during his testimony that he revealed that Nixon had a taping system, right, and that that the Oval Office and all the phones in the Oval Office had been there. It was a very extensive recording system, and that every conversation, both live and on the telephone, has been recorded for years. And
the way he said this was just kind of like, oh yeah, by the way, and if you watch the films of that moment of testimony, people are just like, what?
Oh yeah.
Did he just say what we thought he said?
Yeah, that's
perhaps
exactly right.
The biggest single bomb of testimony that was dropped at any one time
I think that that's right.
Was that?
I think that that's absolutely right. And when Butterfield was called to testify, he wondered if, in fact, he would be asked about this, because at this point, nobody had spoken to this. There are certainly plenty of rumors that have been floating around, but this changed everything, right? This changed everything because with the recording system there were tapes.
Well, any hope that Nixon had of getting out of this with his presidency intact ended at that moment.
Well, that's right. And so a special prosecutor had already been assigned to the case by the DOJ, and the special prosecutor almost immediately then requested access to the tapes. And on the 23rd, then the Nixon administration refused the special prosecutor's request to hand over the tapes. This would lead to a kind of tug of war for the next several months. But it really, I mean, this is the smoking gun. And so, as you're suggesting, Dave, when Butterfield revealed that there was a recording system, it just the dynamic of this this episode changed dramatically. And I think Nixon's standing amongst the American public dropped precipitously, because it's just everything that he had been saying, people wondered about. And if he had been lying about this, then maybe he'd been lying about that. So
well,
the tapes.
The refusal to turn them over, that suggested more than anything else that he must have something to hide. And
that's right.
You know, otherwise, what's the big deal? But this is where he starts playing some judicial games that Donald Trump has taken over some of the plays from that playbook, Supreme Court, executive privilege, and that sort of thing.
That's exactly right. It's the tapes and Nixon's attempts to sort of hang on to the tapes then become really the dominant story in American life for the next several months. And it really did seem like this would eventually bring Nixon's tenure in office to an end. Nobody was quite sure when, but the tapes were so problematic, and Nixon's reaction to releasing the tapes was so problematic that this was, yeah. So what else was going on in July, Dave?
Music was going on in July. We had some albums come out. We had, for instance, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid came out on the 13th of July. Dylan's 12th studio album, a soundtrack for the Sam Peckinpah film of the same name. Dylan himself appeared in the film as the character Alias.
Yeah, he's
it's
there
quite,
for a while.
It's actually quite a good film, I think.
Yeah,
but it's this, of course, the hit off of this sent dozens of people scurrying to make covers, knocking on Dylan's door. I think it's been covered like over 70 times.
I believe that's absolutely right. You know, it's become one of Dylan's best known songs. You have this flurry of Dylan songs from the 60s, early 60s, mid 60s. And then this song, I think in particular, people have really gravitated toward over the years.
And it's basically a literal transcription of a scene in the movie where a lawman gets shot, is dying next to the river, and his wife is holding him in her arms as he dies. And these are, he has a few words to say to her before. So
yeah,
that's how that came about.
And that movie was, as you're suggesting, it's not bad. There was a tremendous amount of anticipation surrounding it, and for a Peckinpah movie, it's not all that violent either. So it's definitely worth tracking down.
And Chris Christopherson, of course, is Billy the Kid.
Coburn's in it, right?
Rita Coolidge.
Rita Coolidge is in it. Yeah, I thought that James Coburn. I thought Coburn was in.
Coburn plays Pat Garrett. That's right.
That's it. Coburn's. Oh, he's so good.
Well, I really enjoyed it. But On that day, 13th, Queen also released their debut album. It's the day the Everly Brothers broke up. Phil Everly smashed his guitar on the floor midway through their show together, and that was the end. Speaking
That
of
really
brothers,
was, yeah.
Speaking of brothers that get along well, Ray Davies of the Kinks had an emotional outburst during the performance on the same day and announced that he was quitting the group.
Just pick Big Brothers for 200, please. Yeah.
Yes, no kidding. The difference is that didn't stick. The Kings continued to work together.
No, yeah, they certainly did.
So it's so strange. So strange.
Tough day. Yeah, it's
on July 3rd, David Bowie retired the Ziggy Stardust.
This is
in front of a shocked audience at the Hammersmith Odeon in London at the end of his British tour.
Do I have this right? Yeah. So this was, I think, only a handful of people were aware of this, and certainly none of the fans were. Is this the performance that D.A. Pennebecker filmed? There is, you maybe know more about this than I do. I know that there is a film that famed documentarian D.A. Pennebecker made of Bowie, Ziggy Stardust. It was the last or next to last performance of Ziggy, and it was at the Hammersmith. But I'm not. Anyway, that apparently is a really interesting film, but nobody knew.
And I think that inspired the film 40 years later, Velvet Goldmine.
Oh, right.
For sure. Yeah. Let's see what else. We're an American Band came out on 16th. Grand Funk Railroad's 7th studio album, or rather Grand Funk's first studio album, right? Because it was
the shortened name,
the short name, and it was a big album for them.
And that hit, right, as we talked about in previous episodes, it's a classic.
Oh, it's just great.
A debauched classic.
Yeah. Tres Hombres comes out on the 26th. ZZ Top. With LaGrange and stuff like that on it. So
awesome.
New York Dolls came out with their debut album on the 27th.
A really important group. I think looking back from this era, they were extraordinarily influential. I think they were kind of a little under the radar in terms of the public was concerned, but in New York, they changed the way a lot of people saw music.
Yeah, guess who produced that?
Well, I'm going to guess Todd Rundgren, but
that's a good guess. That's exactly right. Yeah,
is that right?
Yes, it is. On the 28th was the Summer Jam at Watkins Glen, which
that's a big show. Yeah,
it was a huge show. It really gets. Everybody talks about Woodstock, but this attracted over 600,000 fans.
Yeah,
with acts like Grateful Dead, Allman Brothers, and the band.
Yeah, it's considered one of the real great festivals, of that era. And again, kind of in the same neck of the woods as Woodstock. Watkins Glen and Woodstock, New York are relatively close.
Have a couple other debut albums in the month. 10cc came out with their debut album. Barry Manilow did. The 4th studio album of Jim Croce, ironically named Life and Times. That's irony looking back, but this was the one with Bad Leroy Brown, and it just pretty much cemented his spot in the spotlight. And
it certainly did. Yeah.
Tragically, just real shortly before he died.
There we go.
So that's July.
All right.
In music.
Awesome. So in August, a couple things to note. In early August, the 2nd of August, federal officials alert Spiro Agnew and his legal team that he's under investigation for, among other things, bribery and tax evasion. What, me worry? But yes, so it this would all come to a head just a couple of months later. But the feds
And
did
of
get
course, in the that was back in the time when politicians denied wrongdoing. All right, that's they don't seem to always feel like they need to anymore. But
oh, it was a simpler time.
it was a simpler time, and he denied any wrongdoing right up until the second that he left office, essentially.
Well,
So,
yeah, I mean, even coming out of the courthouse, well, we'll get to this, but even coming out of the courthouse, he was, you know, Agnew.
unrepentant.
So for sure, the 15th of August, then the tape controversy is just exploding around Nixon, and Nixon then takes it upon himself to address the nation from the Oval Office, and where he subsequently denies having any prior knowledge of anything about anything. The denials continue. He I guess, right, thought that this would be enough to sort of put water on the fire, but if anything, I think it just made people even more suspicious. And I think even Nixon aficionados began to see him very differently come August of 73. And yeah,
Well, if
I mean,
you're,
it was
you know,
unconvincing.
yeah, if your whole thing has been from the beginning, we're going to get to the bottom of this maximum transparency, blah blah blah, and then you say, "Oh, but you're not going to look at my tapes." Um, that's a mixed signal.
Yeah, it was it was an astounding take, and it really didn't serve Nixon well. I just have one other thing to mention.
Wait.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, just what's no longer exploding on August 15th?
I do not.
American bombs in Cambodia.
Oh, yes, right.
That was the official halt of 12 years of secret bombings, essentially. Certainly un well, they were never sanctioned.
No.
Nixon never went to, well, Johnson and then Nixon never went to Congress with this, and so we're going to be doing this. They just did it, and this is also one of the areas where Henry Kissinger played a very central role.
There's no question about that, and so this led to the collapse of the monarchy in Cambodia. It gave rise to a despot named Pol Pot, who killed millions
Yeah.
Of people. And I'm reminded of the late Anthony Bourdain when he talks about Cambodia. All it says something along the lines of, all it takes is a visit to Cambodia, and all you want to do is kill Henry Kissinger with your bare hands, right? Because it's so shocking what the U.S. did and what Kissinger was really largely responsible for in terms of the bombings. It's extraordinary.
And of course, Pol Pot regime, that whole thing was a subject of the Killing Fields.
That's right. No, that's a terrific film.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
awful. It's over on August 15th after 12 years.
There we go. And speaking of Henry Kissinger, Henry Kissinger, of course, was not the Secretary of State during all this time. He was, again, a kind of special advisor to Nixon. This man, William Rogers, had been Secretary of State during Nixon's tenure in office, and Rogers
kind of a figurehead.
Of sorts. He had enough, and so on the 22nd of August, Rogers steps down. He was shut out of virtually every major foreign policy initiative, whether you're talking about detente with Moscow, you're talking about the visits to Beijing, whether you're talking about the negotiations with North Vietnam, or even the secret bombings in Cambodia. Rogers, I mean, and Nixon and Kissinger actively worked to keep Rogers at arm's length from any of this. It's amazing that Rogers stayed in the position as long as he did, but eventually, and so once Rogers steps down, then of course, Kissinger then takes over and becomes what he had been essentially acting as for years, becomes the Secretary of State. What else is going on in August?
Well, Does the name Dean Corll mean anything to you? Have you ever heard of this guy?
It doesn't mean anything to me.
Well, it didn't mean
Corll,
anything to me
no.
either, but in my research, I was a bit surprised because on August 8th, Dean Corll was shot to death by one of his teenage accomplices, Elmer Wayne Henley, at his home in Pasadena, Texas. Henley turned himself in and confessed, uncovering mass murders in Houston. 28 young boys had been abducted, tortured, and murdered by Corll and his two accomplices, Henley and David Brooks. What? David Brooks, of course, went on to have quite a career at the New York Times. But
what?
I'm
No.
I'm kidding. Same name, but
speaking of getting your legal team together.
It's a different David Brooks. We
well, there we go. Okay.
Emphasize that here. So I had never heard of this guy before, but clearly,
no, it didn't ring.
Clearly, he was batting in the major leagues when it comes to
I guess so.
Serial killers. And then there's music, of course. In August, we had "Killing Me Softly," released by Roberta Flack.
That's a terrific song with a complicated backstory. Yeah.
The backstory is incredible. Eventually went double platinum.
That's right.
Was nominated for a Grammy Award for Album of the Year, which it lost to, well, lo and behold, Stevie Wonder. Beginning of quite a run for him of Grammys. That was his Intervisions album. And Intervisions was released 2 days after that, on the 3rd. And of course, became a Grammy winner for Stevie Wonder.
That's right.
It was his 16th studio album, released on Tamla, the subsidiary of Motown.
Right, and I'm not even certain he was 30 years old yet. I mean, he had been.
He wasn't.
Right,
he wasn't. He was. He might have been 22, 23. He was a long way from 30 at that point.
Yeah, so he had he as they say, a veteran in the industry by the time we get to 73. Yeah, Intervisions is
this
classic.
is kind of seen as his transition from little Stevie Wonder, right, to the grown up mature
that's
artist.
right. He's making he had made his kind of Declaration of Independence, and was now taking hold of his own career. Still part of the label, but no longer really subject to Berry Gordy's tutelage, if you will.
This ranked number 34 on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest albums of all time.
It's I mean, it goes without saying, it's terrific, and there's several numbers that are quite political. It's and it holds up.
3 days later, he is seriously injured in a car accident outside Durham, North Carolina.
Right. This is a huge
thing. Spends 4 days in a coma. Yeah. So, wow. A busy month for Stevie.
No, that's for sure.
On the 11th, George Lucas released American Graffiti, which is as much an homage to rock and roll radio as probably ever came out of Hollywood.
That's absolutely right. And Lucas gave a lot of attention to the music and how the music is presented in the show, and how you hear it. It's I mean, what a film. I mean, it's one of the classics, no question.
One of the classics, yeah. On the 13th, pronounced Leonard Skinner, the debut album of the rock band Leonard Skinner. They supposedly named themselves after their gym teacher.
Teacher, who
everybody hated.
Yeah, but they actually kind of reconciled with it at some point, that kind of thing. But yeah, what a band, what a nuanced band. I mean, that album there's just so much on it that's
one album
surprising.
Give Me 3 Steps, Simple Man, Tuesday's Gone, Freebird.
I mean,
yeah, especially the last two are just absolute anthems.
They certainly are, but they're so different too. It's hard to imagine that the same band recorded them. It's just, yeah, for a bunch of young guys from the South, it's
It's
just
amazing.
astounding.
It's amazing. It really is.
Yeah.
The quality of music on that album. Also went to double platinum eventually.
Mhm. Yeah,
The Allman Brothers, speaking of Southern rock bands with
that's
a
right.
tragedy in there, they nearly suffered another tragedy on the 25th when Butch Trucks crashed his car near Macomb, Georgia, not far from where Dwayne Allman had been
Well,
killed years earlier.
that's that thing where Dwayne has the wreck, and then like 18 months later, there's another wreck, and then okay, yeah. So talk about
But
star-crossed.
Trucks survived with only a broken leg. So if you're going to be in a cursed band, that's probably as easy as you're going to get off. On the 28th, Let's Get It On, the 13th album of Marvin Gaye. Also a big deal for him and for Motown.
And if anything, kind of eclipses the previous effort. What's going on, right? I mean, in a way that
it changes the direction and changes his image of significantly, I think.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, the Marvin Gaye, the social consciousness of what's going on is altered and is forever
And
altered.
Marvin Gaye was always a sexy guy, but this really doubles down on that.
Oh yeah, no question about that. Quite explicit for the time.
Yeah, yes. I think one of the songs is "You Really Like to Ball," something like that. So, what?
Yeah, yeah.
Goat's Head Soup came out on the 31st. Most of it was recorded outside of the UK because of taxes in Jamaica. Some of it was in the United States. And the big single from that was Angie.
That's right.
To number one. Other albums in August, Moontan, an album I just absolutely love. Ninth album by Golden Earring. Just I think that's an undervalued contribution.
Golden Earring, yeah. Well, that's with Radar Love's on that, right?
Radar Love's on that,
yeah. And that's boy, that became. I mean, talk about your big songs. That's
I think
a defining song for Golden Earring.
Yes, and based essentially on the strength of that single, the album was certified gold. And that's basically what most people know of Earring or knew of Earring at that time.
That's right.
Anyway.
That's right.
The American Graffiti album, of course, came out as well.
Soundtrack.
41 different rock and roll hits. And the Allman Brothers Band came up with Brothers and Sisters, their fourth studio album. So, and as you said, there's a lot going on after Dwayne died. Barry Oakley died in a motorcycle accident in 1972.
Just a few blocks. I mean, like 6 blocks from
the bassist. Yeah, he had been excessively drinking, consuming drugs since Dwayne's death. We already talked about the Trucks accident, but they managed to put out another album anyway, in spite of it all. So
yeah, and I think you can argue that they're actually picking up steam in terms of popularity. I think people would argue that the earliest incarnation of the band is always the best version, but in terms of hits and whatnot, they're picking up steam bizarrely. Real survivors.
Okay, that's August.
So in September of 73, I just want to just start with a peculiar story, but I think an important one. So since 1956, when Colonel Tom Parker had steered the career of a young man from Tupelo, Mississippi, one Elvis Presley. And in an unusual arrangement, Parker had been receiving 50%, 50, of Elvis's revenues since the since the late 50s. And of course, it's Parker who guides Elvis's career. It's Parker whose idea it was for Elvis to go to Hollywood and be in all these really quite wretched movies. And many people had long sort of decried Parker's influence. But Elvis and Parker part ways on the 3rd of September after a tiff over, among other things, kind of hotel brands or something. But it's clear that Parker had made out, well, he made out like a bandit. And it's also clear that Elvis was probably better off without him. But at this point, it was so late in Elvis's life, it didn't make much difference in terms of Elvis's creative output. That's unfortunate because there are kind of points along the way that it looks as though Elvis could sort of reclaim a kind of past glory. The comeback special, of course, from the late 60s on NBC is a key example of that. But one wonders if had Elvis had better management, more in tune management, what his career would have been like, because he really suffered, I think, under the under the leadership of Parker. I think it's disastrous, candidly. We mentioned this earlier. I'm going to bounce up, but the 20th. So Bobby Riggs.
Right.
Riggs on the 20th of September battled Billie Jean King, who was a star at the time on the women's circuit. The so-called Battle of the Sexes 2 was going to be televised live at the Astrodome, and it was. And so, and to the shock of many, actually, King just whipped him. Straight sets. It was completely dismantled Riggs, which really kind of brought Riggs's kind of 15 minutes of fame here to an end. But it was seen not as it clearly was a publicity stunt, but it was viewed as a big moment in the women's movement. It seems, again, odd from our vantage point today, but the fact that King beat Riggs, people took that to mean something. They took a kind of political meaning from it. And it is one of those mileposts in the women's movement of this era that was deeply meaningful and it also spoke to men as well. I think it was unsettling to many men who didn't think this was possible.
Riggs was, clearly he had his personal reasons for doing this, but he was a big mouth. He did this whole thing to question the value of women's sports, women's tennis, the idea that women wanted to be paid more, wanted some more equal coverage and things like that. I said, well, why? Because they really don't deserve it. The quality of the sport compared to men is minuscule, and I'll prove it.
Prove it.
He ended up not proving it, and I think that's one of the things that made that such a big deal. He was really trying to make a statement and failed to do so.
I think that's right. And so it's worth noting that he seems a kind of cartoon character today, but he was considered a kind of potent kind of cultural and political figure, and that many people sort of had cast their lot with Riggs. That guy, kind of truth teller kind of thing. And when he got it handed to him in this way, it was people were shocked. People really were shocked. They just didn't think it was even possible that something like this could happen. But so Billie Jean King, fine career. She was a real leader on the women's circuit as well in terms of prize money and the like. But probably this will be what she's remembered for.
Yes,
is defeating Riggs in '73.
Yes,
of all things.
I don't think she really even has a problem with that. I think she realized what the significance is.
Agreed.
So.
Yeah, she understood the context, and she got it. No question about it. A couple of things, if I could, from September. On the 20th of September, Jim Croce's plane crashes, and Croce and passes away, ending a kind of fledgling career. And as you suggested earlier, he's just starting to get traction with a number of his albums and a number of his singles. And one wonders sort of what this would have looked like, what a Jim Croce career would have looked like, because he seemed to be really well positioned to be one of the kind of signature voices of the 70s and beyond, and it all ends so early for him. Last thing I want to mention here real quickly in terms of September is on the 29th, it's revealed that one Rosemary Woods, longtime secretary for Richard Nixon, managed to, in a transcription exercise, managed to erase a tape between Nixon and Haldeman. And 18 and a half minutes were erased. And as it turned out, in order to erase the tape, she had to stretch her small frame really from one side of the room to the next.
And for 18 minutes, yeah.
For 18 minutes.
She actually reenacted that for the press.
No, that's true. It one more example, I think, that just sort of stretched the bounds of reason. And it also, I think, Rosemary Woods loved the Nixons, was incredibly loyal to the Nixon family. And it suggested that there were still plenty of people to willing to throw themselves under the bus for the old man. And there we have another example of it. She was ridiculed and mocked to her dying days.
This darn new tape technology, it's just, you don't know what you're doing. You can mess up.
That's right. But it was really, the conversation was believed to be key. And it's interesting that they were never able then to rehabilitate the tape on any level. And so whatever was erased was fully erased. And it did seem as though it was just part of a larger cover up. And now you've got Rosemary Woods involved. So what else is going on in September?
Well, on the 22nd, Henry Kissinger actually does become the United States Secretary of State. Had been the National Security Advisor up to then, but now he's officially
he gets the
Secretary
nameplate.
of State.
That's right. Yeah.
And on the 28th, one of its late activities, the Weather Underground bombed the ITT building in New York City in a protest for U.S. involvement in 1973 Chilean coup d'etat.
Coup d'etat, yeah. This is the
another thing with Henry Kissinger's signature all over it.
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely right. IT&T was considered a kind of globalist organization, right? It was considered a kind of potent symbol. IT&T hasn't existed for a long time, but
Willie Mays retired too. A baseball legend. So
yeah, the Say Hey Kid. Yeah, for sure.
Hey Kid, yeah. And of course there was music. On the 3rd, Johnny Cash and His Woman came out as an album. It was
what an unfortunate title.
Yeah, well, it doesn't. Yeah, doesn't sound as good anymore. But
didn't sound all that great then. But anyway.
I think then it didn't have the same cringe factor.
Okay. All right.
But that was his 46th album. I think they had fun doing it.
Yes, June Carter
one of
Cash,
the great
right?
love stories of rock and of country music, anyway.
Yeah, really kind of the first family of country music. Yeah.
On the 7th, Overnight Sensation came out.
The Raspberries. Oh.
Frank Zappa and the Mother of Invention.
No, wait a minute. What Overnight Sensation? Frank
Zappa and the Mother of Invention.
Had me going.
Yeah, so their 12th album. They were credited as the Mothers. So
here we have the requisite kind of brief Frank Zappa conversation, and so Zappa very influential, revered by musicians, but
never had a huge popularity. Not like many of his contemporaries. He never enjoyed like the concert, the Coliseum concert type of popularity. But as you said, it was critically appreciated, and a lot of people got into his weird brand of music.
It was a kind of signifier, right? If you own Zappa albums, and you proclaimed yourself a kind of Zappa fan, it did say something about you.
Oh yeah, said that you're a freak.
Yeah, but also a kind of well, a freak with standards. I mean,
A former
Zappa's.
roommate of mine, Aaron Gregg, was a Frank Zappa fan, and I
Oh,
ended
that's
up
it. Well, yeah,
having to
right.
listen to a lot more Zappa than I would have cared to. But
Some of it's really difficult, and
some
some
of
of
it's
it's
really
not.
difficult, and some of it's really good.
Yeah.
I particularly like Joe's Garage, things like
Mhm.
that. Anyway, Overnight Sensation was the 12th album that the Mothers played on. It was his 17th album. During the same sessions for that, he recorded his solo album, Apostrophe.
Mhm.
Um, so Zappa's just in the middle of his career here, and Overnight Sensation has one of my favorite album covers, certainly of the Zappa output.
Yeah.
On the 11th, Angel Clare came out.
The
Art
yeah, Art Garfunkel, right?
Art Garfunkel's very first solo album.
Long awaited, right? That people have
Yes,
been sort of wondering what Artie was up to.
and I don't know. I was never part of these discussions back then because I was 12 years old, but I would suspect that a lot of people thought when Art Garfunkel and Paul Simon go their separate ways, Garfunkel is going to be the star. He's going to be the one who does fine on his own.
Well, yeah, and in so much as they had the incredible voice, the incredible. I mean, there was something angelic about the Garfunkel sound. I mean,
Well,
yeah,
and at that point, when he's no longer with Simon, he basically has his choice of what songs he wants to do, what songs he wants to cover. He can, if he has a good hand, there's no stopping.
and I
Sky's the
think
limit.
okay, and right, absolutely. And so that album, Angel Clare, it's fine. I mean, it's fine, and it has
It's
a number
fine.
of songs. But it seemed as though Garfunkel was never all that interested. I mean, he had a number of interests. He was never solely focused on music. And so in the way that you might think, as you're suggesting, that he becomes this great interpreter and, he's kind of the voice, the incredible voice, he just never really threw himself into that. He just wasn't interested in it. And so it just did, his single solo career never really evolved in the way that many people thought it would.
Yeah. On the 21st, Everybody Likes Some Kind of Music came out. That was the 8th studio album by Billy Preston.
This is So this is Preston at his zenith, right? This is Preston with churning out big LPs and big singles and still riding high from his association with the Beatles and all.
On the 23rd, the Roxy Theater opens in West Hollywood. On the 27th,
it's a big venue.
Yeah, it is a big venue. On the 27th, Don Kirshner's rock concert premiered on syndicated television in the U.S., including a performance by the Stones.
It was also big. We talked about this in the last episode, but I mean, there were few options, and so the midnight special and Kirshner's rock concert were must viewing. If you were into music, you stayed up and watched those because that's where you'd see your acts, your favorites perform. Yeah.
On the 28th, Selling England by the Pound, Genesis's fifth studio album. Other albums coming out in September, Half Breed by Cher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cher. Right.
Don't Call Me Mama Anymore.
Oh, that's a cat.
Yes. Live album.
Yeah.
Live album by Cass Elliot. And it was her third RCA record. Also the last one before her death.
Right.
So And then Paper Roses, a debut album by a young, relatively unknown singer. She is unknown. Her family is not.
Yeah.
Marie Osmond.
Right. I mean, undoubtedly, there were plenty of people who thought, well, didn't realize the Osmonds had a sister.
Yes.
And
Although
there
she
she
had
was.
already appeared with them publicly.
That's right.
When she was like 3 years old.
That's absolutely right. But and it's sort of Marie's coming out party, and she will then become a substantial kind of star mid decade when she and her brother have a variety series, the Donnie and Marie Show, which is popular in its own way.
Well, with this single, also Paper Roses.
This
is like zero to 100 for her career. It's a big hit.
Right. It's still, I mean, right. Absolutely.
So yeah, that was the start of a long career in entertainment. I think, and I think I say this with some satisfaction. I think Jimmy Osmond.
Don't be mean. Don't be mean.
Was the only one who never really established a career in entertainment.
But
Jimmy Osmond just drove.
In Jimmy's defense, I mean, he did. I mean, long-haired leopard from Liverpool.
Oh yes,
I mean,
yes.
That's But
anyway, this is one reason I'm glad he didn't.
Well, there we go. Oh, so we've anchored David Brooks and now Jimmy Osmond. Well, okay.
So that was September.
All right, very good.
1973 in music.
Well, so this takes us to October, and October of 73 is really dominated by Spiro Agnew. Jeez, Spiro Agnew and his resignation. It caught many people by surprise. Agnew had been for a long time taking bribes, even as far back as when he was a government official in Maryland, predating his governorship. Anyway, taking kickbacks, literally oftentimes bags of cash. This is all depicted, really well depicted, in a relatively recent documentary and podcast series, Bagman, which we heartily recommend, from Rachel Maddow and MSNBC. Yeah. But the feds closed in on Agnew, and interestingly, a deal was cut, and the deal basically was to avoid a trial. The DOJ dangled the notion that, well, if you resign, I mean, so there was this interesting kind of dance where Agnew then goes to answer charges in a Maryland courtroom. Simultaneously, he has submitted his resignation later to the Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, and those things happen at the exact same time. And he enters the courtroom as vice president and leaves the courtroom as a private citizen, essentially. And Agnew is done. And this caught, I mean, people had some inkling that there was trouble surrounding Agnew, but he had denied it. He had said he was vociferous in the fact that he was going to fight it. And he said that sort of walking into the courtroom, and then he pleads no contest. And people were aghast that Agnew had disappeared as quickly as this, and really without a fight, because if anything, Agnew was about the fight. And here you have a guy, well, he's just sort of waved the white flag and saw a political cartoon from the day as the Justice Department gives Agnew Humpty Dumpty the heave ho. And Nixon is now without a vice president. What are the sort of the implications, and what are we to take from the Agnew debacle? I mean, it's did it set a precedent? Did it give us a sense of how this might kind of play out in future episodes? I mean, it did seem, well, there seemed a kind of courtliness to it, a kind of gentleman's honor piece to this that is a little surprising when you think about jurisprudence today. But
well,
what do we take away from this?
It was a deal that, in a sense, worked out for both sides because
I think that's right. Yeah,
on one hand, Agnew was not going to be facing any prison time, and had there been a trial, one of two things could have happened. You get a big Agnew fan in the jury, and you have a hang
that's
jury,
right.
and you don't manage to get a conviction. On the other hand, the evidence is damning. There's a lot of evidence, and it's been collected over years. So if you don't get that guy or woman on the jury, he's going to jail. So both sides had a reason to think that,
Right.
what they were doing was probably the best thing.
And amongst the most jarring things of all this is that Agnew's activities had nothing to do with Watergate. And so I mean, it's just, there are so many things happening. It's just really kind of, so a couple of days later then, Nixon nominates one Gerald Ford, congressman from Michigan, to be the new vice president. The 25th Amendment, which had been passed a few years earlier, clarified the secession process, which was a little murky in the original Constitution. And so the 25th Amendment made clear that the president is able to nominate a vice president, but that then the vice president has to be confirmed by Congress. And of course, Ford would be. Ford's very different from Agnew. It's 180. While Ford's a partisan, he is maybe the nicest guy in Washington, and even Democrats have really nothing bad to say about Gerald Ford. And of course, Ford's vice presidency is a short one, and Ford becomes a figure of historical note because he not only becomes president, but then offers the pardon to Nixon. And people have long speculated that maybe perhaps there was a deal, at least some sort of conversation about a potential pardon. There's no evidence to suggest that, and Ford always denied it. But it doesn't. Anyway, it doesn't.
Well,
it doesn't seem impossible.
If you take the character of Richard Nixon into account, it seems incongruous to think that Nixon would pick a vice president who had not said beforehand, all right, I will pardon you if you need it.
Incongruous. Yes.
It seems like that's something that Nixon would have wanted to hear.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And given where Nixon was in October of '73, and the wolves were at the door already.
Indeed.
All right. And on the 17th of October, in response to dispute in the Middle East, OPEC, they cut oil production, and it's a gas shock, and Americans are suddenly confronted with lengthy lines. Rationing is in the conversation. Many states go to an odd even kind of system in terms of license plates, and when you can buy fuel and when you can't. And
prices go up.
Prices go up. They double, triple, quadruple, quintuple in many places. And people across the country are left wondering with what is OPEC? I mean, many people had no real sense of not only what OPEC was, but even where oil came from, right? Because I think most people in this era thought that America, you can see oil pumps here. And so obviously the United States pumps in its own oil and manufactures its own gas. But that, in fact, we learned something quite different. And this is also OPEC. This is OPEC then flexing its muscles for really one of the first times. And this won't be the last time that OPEC flexes its muscles. Interestingly.
But Americans knew who OPEC was or what OPEC was after this. They certainly
You got
did.
that right. One of the chief members of OPEC that was really pushing for an embargo was one Shah of Iran, who encouraged his fellow OPEC members to stick it to the West for their support of Israel. That's an interesting name, and we'll have more to say about the Shah in future episodes for sure.
Toward the
On
end
the
of the decade more. Yeah.
That's right. 19th of October, Nixon rejects an appeal court order to turn over the tapes. And so he offers a deal instead. He offers a deal that he will have the tapes transcribed by one John Stennis, a Congress or senator
What?
from exactly senator from Senate.
Who?
Yes,
Who?
Stennis is deaf, and so this. I mean, you just honestly, you just can't make this up, right? You just can't make this up. Again, as we suggested, the wolves are at the door. The next day, the 20th, then the special prosecutor Archibald Cox, who has been pressuring Nixon about lots of things, including the tapes, is summarily fired. Well, it took Nixon a while to be able to find someone. And so in theory, how this works is special prosecutor works for the attorney general. Nixon ordered the then attorney general, Elliot Richardson, to fire Cox. Richardson said no. Nixon fired Richardson. The next in line, William Ruckelshaus was ordered to fire Cox. He said no. He got fired. Finally, had to go to the third highest member, and a guy by the name of Robert Bork, who we'll hear from again at some point. Robert Bork then went ahead and fired Cox. Cox then the next day gave quite a incredible press conference, and the wheels are off. The wheels are off of government at this point. It was, again, termed the Saturday Night Massacre. And it has seemed as though the country is moving into a kind of, it's a worn out phrase, but kind of banana republic territory. We've never really seen this kind of before, this kind of thing before. And the president's actions were now sort of, I mean, even supporters saw his actions as kind of out of bounds.
Well, there was no pretense anymore about wanting to get things clarified and getting to the bottom of this or anything like that.
Well, that's right. It had changed. Nixon, right, had for quite a while really talked about, wanting to, be transparent and all that, and it was clear that was a complete, it was a complete lie. At the near the end of the month,
Bork had some Supreme Court ambitions, by the way.
He certainly did, and they were quashed in the 1980s. And one wonders if, as he was not confirmed by the Senate, one wonders if, well, memories are long in Washington. I'm sure it didn't help him any, particularly amongst Democrats on the Judiciary Committee a decade and a half later.
But in his defense, both Richardson and Ruckelshaus had told him,
"Oh yeah,
don't resign. Go ahead. It's nobody else has to."
That's a fair point, and it is the case that, I mean, it would have been as bad as the Saturday Night Massacre was. It would have somehow been even worse if you couldn't have found anybody in the Department of Justice to carry out the order. I mean, Then on the 23rd, Nixon finally bows to pressure and turns over the tapes to Judge John Sirica, and this is it's considered kind of it's obviously a huge moment, and I think whatever Nixon thought he could kind of escape, it became clear that this was really going to be the so-called smoking gun, because the tapes had everything. And so once those tapes were turned over and the transcription process began, then, I mean, it just was a matter of time. The clock had started to tick. But he did eventually then yield to political and legal pressure. What else is going on in October?
We have the third solo album by Lou Reed, Berlin, released on the 5th. It's a concept album, talking about a couple's struggle with drug addiction and abuse. Berlin, when we talk about Berlin, we talk about Lou Reed. We're also talking about David Bowie somehow.
Sure.
It's a time document in that sense. Also on the 5th, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Elton John's second album of the year.
Yeah, this is the album, right?
His double LP, the 7th studio album total. and it would sell 20 million copies worldwide.
It's,
An extremely well, I think your favorite album, if I remember correctly,
it's certainly my favorite album of Elton John's. It's one of my favorite albums of all time. I think it is a, you know, it has stood the test of time. It may in fact be the best double album ever. I think it's extraordinary. So, I mean, I'm not going on a limb there, but
no, you're certainly not. These Foolish Things, Brian Ferry's debut solo album.
Yeah, kind of a mostly covers.
Yes, and some. I like this album.
I like it too, but yeah.
Brian Ferry has been called the most deadly boring pop star.
Oh, I think that's
in the world.
Demonstrably, I've heard that. It's demonstrably not the case. No.
I think musically, that's not the case.
No, he's always interesting, and it started here at the very beginning.
What he's doing at Roxy Music, and then parallel with this.
Yeah,
it's
agreed.
Some great stuff. Yeah. On the 9th, Cyan is the 10th studio album by Three Dog Night. And I believe, well, correct me if I'm wrong, Joy to the World on this one?
Sounds right. That sounds right to me. Yeah. But they are kind of but they are kind of coming to the end, right? They're
the end of a very, very successful streak. Yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, but it's kind of on the downhill side. Yeah.
Jackson Browne's For Every Man is released on the 15th. As is Mystery to Me by Fleetwood Mac, with one of my favorite album covers of all time. I love it. I love that album cover. I just think it's fantastic.
I do too. And this period of Fleetwood Mac I actually think it's really interesting. It's obviously eclipsed by the early Fleetwood Mac with Peter Green, and then of course the later Fleetwood Mac.
Peter Green's no longer there, but now we have Bob Welch and Christine McVie.
I think it's really good. Yeah. Welch and McVie are terrific.
The 17th, Montrose comes out, which is the debut studio album of the group.
That's a monster album. As people, I mean, it really rocks. And that's a great
album. Burnin', the 6th album by the Wailers, and this was the last one that they did together. This was the last Wailer album.
Yeah, they really were torn apart in part by Blackwell's presence, Chris Blackwell's presence. We talk about this at length in the Behind the Curtain episode with Chris Blackwell, but it was not a happy camp. The Wailers were,
I think
they were not of one mind when it came to Blackwell.
Blackwell took the group in a slightly different direction to make the market.
Yeah, that's right.
In the States, which absolutely worked. It was
it certainly did.
From a marketing perspective,
brilliant. It certainly did.
And he certainly appreciated Peter Tosh and Buddy Wailer, but I think arguably his favorite child was Bob Marley, and that probably was not something that he hid very well. So I can imagine that led to some tensions as well.
But certainly, I'm sure that's right. And I think, Blackwell's biography suggests as much. I think it's also the case that not everybody in the Wailers was happy with their career being steered by a white man. I mean, just to be candid. And so that group comes apart.
There were some trust issues as well.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it, for sure. Yeah.
The Who released Quadrophenia on the 19th as well.
So huge. And if you're going to listen to a Who rock opera, well, that's the one to listen to.
Well, I agree. Yes, it is.
It's a more coherent story, and the songs are, I mean, there's just a ton of good songs on it. Oh,
yeah, there are.
It's so good. Yeah.
I don't have the same. I don't detest Tommy the way you do, but I would agree that Quadrophenia is the better of the
Oh,
two.
it's really good.
Also in October, The Joker by Steve Miller Band came out, their eighth album, with of course the single The Joker, eventually bringing that up to that number one on the
Yeah.
charts as well. And Suzi Quatro came out with her debut album.
So Suzi Quatro, right? A figure of note in the UK in particular. Americans saw Suzi Quatro on Happy Days.
That's
That's how.
yeah.
That's how. I mean,
Oh,
right?
what was her name? The her
Well,
character.
okay. Leather. Is that Leather Tuscadero?
Tuscadero is right.
Maybe it's Susie
Tuscadero's right.
Tuscadero. I can't. But yeah, but she was a kind of semi-regular on Happy Days. But she had some hits in the United States, but she was a big figure in the UK, and she still
She's
is.
kind
She's
of a
like a
female Fonzie, you know.
right, right, female
Yeah.
Fonzie. Happy Days will premiere in early 1974, and undoubtedly we will be talking about that show for years to come.
Yes.
Oh gosh, Happy Days.
But I think in America she's probably best known for her duet. Um,
So with Chris Norman, Stumbling
yeah,
In.
Stumbling In. Exactly. Yeah.
It's a fun song. Yeah.
It's a good song. Yeah,
Yeah,
that is.
absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's October 1973 in music. So that brings us to November 1973. Steve, what was going on?
Yeah. So November 1st, acting Attorney General Robert Bork, who was the hatchet man during the Saturday Night Massacre, of course, appointed a new special prosecutor. And the special prosecutor that Bork put in front for the investigation was one Leon Jaworski.
Maybe not doing Nixon any great favors by doing
maybe that. Not. So I mean, so this made Nixon rethink the whole Archibald Cox debacle. Yeah, Jaworski was an experienced, no nonsense attorney who, frankly, turned up the heat. I think Jaworski could read the tea leaves, understood that the advantage was his, and he ran with it. And Nixon, Nixon never really bucked Jaworski. I mean, just those days were over. And so when Jaworski asked for something like the tapes, he pretty much got what he wanted. So Jaworski's a huge figure here. Nixon is
at that point. Don't you already have the intuition that your thumb's not plugging the dike anymore? That it's just going to go. That there's no more holding it back.
Well, I think that's yes, and undoubtedly that's the case. And I think at this point, Nixon is starting to lean more closely on his friends on Capitol Hill. I think from Nixon's perspective, an impeachment inquiry is a given. An impeachment trial might in fact take place. But Nixon, in the fall of 73, still thinks that he has enough votes to hang in there. But I mean, right, the idea of stonewalling, I mean, those days are gone. But Nixon being Nixon, well, he still in the public put up a brave face. So on the 17th, he appeared before a group of newspaper editors in Orlando, Florida, and gave one of his most famous speeches. I mean, I think maybe to some degree it's right up there alongside the Checkers speech, where he famously—
I think it's eclipsed the Checkers speech, in fact, yes.
Well, I think you're right. During the speech, he talked about that the American public needs to know that their president is not a crook, and I am not a crook, or I'm not a crook. And so this becomes the line, as you're looking here at a watch that went for sale almost immediately after the speech took place. And it was emblematic, I think, of Nixon's not only stance on Watergate, but kind of a personal approach to politics. Nixon was best when he was kind of working slightly behind the scenes. but as a kind of public figure, he didn't make the best case for himself. So I am not a crook becomes associated with Nixon and follows him, quite frankly, follows him to the grave.
Well, yeah, that's right. He had his moments in the past where he was able to actually rhetorically score points for himself. The Chequers speech was certainly one of them, where he was able to turn around his political fortunes with a well-timed speech. I think the silent majority speech was also one of those where he determined the narrative then of what was going on.
Yeah, I think that's right in those two cases.
But here, there was the narrative was running away on its own. There was no spinning it like he wanted to.
I think that's right. In the it's Americans have more or less made their decision about Nixon at this point. And again, I think his best hope was those long-term relationships he had on Capitol Hill, and I think he was banking on those. And even those folks would end up abandoning him in the summer of '74. Anything else happening in November, Dave?
They launched the Mariner 10 towards Mercury. Here we're just starting to do some to notch up the solar system exploration in preparation for some deep space stuff. That was on November 3rd. And by the way, the Mariner was the first probe to reach Mercury. That was on March 29th, 1974 then. November 7th, the Congress overrode Nixon's veto of the War Powers Resolution.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And the War Powers Resolution, I think, I understand that as being something more or less directly in response to secret bombings and things like this.
Agreed. As well as in response to Johnson's launching the war under strange circumstances, disputed circumstances, years earlier. So,
Congress was sick of presidents just doing whatever they wanted when it came to using the military, and so from November 7th on, we had the War Powers Resolution, which limited presidential power to wage war without congressional approval.
Right.
November 8th, Disney came out with its 21st feature film, Robin Hood.
That's okay. I have a soft spot for that, right?
Robin Hood was good. Yeah,
features Phil Harris, the vocal talents of Phil Harris, Roger Miller.
Wasn't Phil Harris Baloo in?
He was
in Jungle Book. Yeah, right.
He was. Yeah. It's great. It's terrific.
November 11th, Egypt and Israel signed a ceasefire accord that was more or less brokered by the states. The 17th. Okay, we talked about the 17th.
Yeah.
And then on November 21st, we had the 18.5-minute gap on the White House tape. Apparently just a minor technical gaffe that his poor overworked secretary could not overcome and transcribe.
And remarkably limber as well, apparently.
Yes.
Given what was necessary to make that erasure happen.
It was almost a 20-minute stretch. A stretch in just about every sense.
There you go. Oh, exactly right. I mean, when you look at all this, you step back for a second. I mean, it's amazing that Nixon stayed in office as long as he did. I mean, because it just really is one thing after the next. And some of them are just, they're just beyond belief, like this.
Yeah, this comes less than a week after he tells the nation, "I'm not a crook."
I mean,
And
come
then,
on. What are we doing here?
yeah,
I know. It's just, well, maybe just a simpler time. I mean, I don't know. That's just astounding.
November 27th, Gerald Ford is confirmed by
Yeah.
the Congress, the Senate.
Just a handful of dissenting votes. Yeah.
Yes, 92-3. So it was very just almost they signed a blank check there, but um,
Well, I
so
think right.
overwhelmingly approved.
And to be fair, I think the part of the impetus here was that there was I mean, Nixon was clearly in trouble, and the country was, that vice presidential role was seen as a significant one, and to have a gap like that, people understood. And I think again, there was a kind of the era of good feelings when it came to Jerry Ford. It was hard to find somebody who had much bad to say about him.
Yeah, and maybe the idea there was, well, he probably won't have to resign in disgrace. So
Right.
they had bigger fish to fry.
Well, I think that's right. Yeah, no question. But
Yeah.
yes, but Ford will of course become an incredibly important figure in the next few months. I mean, an incredibly important figure. I think a pivotal one in American history.
In music, had a lot of albums coming out. Ringo Starr's third studio album appeared.
Album. That's a really good album.
It's a good album, yeah, and it went platinum at some point. It peaked at number 2 on the Billboard 200. So yeah, it was well received as well. In fact, Ringo is arguably at this point the most successful ex-Beatle in terms of how his stuff is selling, right? In terms of the popular appeal.
Say that that's only George Harrison might have an argument there, but I mean, he's very popular. He's very popular.
Take a look at the singles and things like that.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, he is and it's a surprise to everyone, but there he is, no question.
Yes, yeah. I don't think anyone would have picked Ringo as
no.
the most successful Beatle solo artist.
Yeah, coming out of the gate.
Coming out of the gate, right?
No. But it's hard. I mean, but this is of course Ringo's apex as well, right? And so, well, whatever happens, I mean, it's sort of a downward trajectory after Ringo.
And I've said it before. This is much George Harrison's success as it is a Ringo success.
Well, no question. That's right.
He was intimately involved in the production and writing of this album.
Yeah.
But I believe all 4 ex-Beatles were involved in some capacity.
That's absolutely right. Seen as a kind of reunion album of sorts. Yeah.
Although, of course, not any of the 4 of them at any one time, right? So
far from it. Yeah.
Far from it, yeah.
Not even, yes, right.
On the 3rd, Abandoned Luncheonette came out. Luncheonette.
Yeah, that's so Hall Notes, their second album.
See, I would not. That's amazing to me. You have, yeah.
No, Hall Notes is their first album.
Second album. I would not have been able to tell you who.
It's Ahmet Ergen's brother, I believe, produces this. I think that's right, and it's got Sarah Smile, right? No, it has
Sarah Smile is, I think, probably on the first album.
What am I thinking of here?
She's Gone.
She's Gone. That's right. She's Gone.
Huge hit for them. And on the strength of that, the album reached 33 on the Billboard Top LPs and Tapes chart. Yeah. And the album eventually certified platinum. Mm-hmm. I loved She's Gone. I thought that was my first.
Oh, sure.
Possibly still my favorite song of theirs. So.
Yeah, I have to say that I mean, there's plenty of people cackling about the Hall & Oates squabble going on right now as in the fall of 2023. Doesn't bring me any joy. They can do what they want to do, but to me, it's sad because I always thought that they were really quite an incredible tandem. I really thought they were.
Yes,
they were great together.
Well, and look how long they managed to
Well,
stay
this
together. I
is,
mean,
I mean, they're,
that's longevity right there. That's
I mean, you can't, I mean, they were a force, a music force in the 70s into the 80s. I mean, they were a really big deal.
a
Yeah.
staple of yacht music.
Yes. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, moving on. November 7th, Piano Man, Billy Joel's second album, came out on November 7th.
Yeah.
He was having some legal difficulties with his former label, Family Productions,
Yeah. That was a
but
mess.
this was really his first real breakthrough album. Piano Man was a huge hit for him, and this was basically the beginning of a very popular and productive career.
Agreed. Yeah. And Piano Man, of course, becomes his signature song. And so, for better or worse, this is how Billy Joel, I think, will be remembered. The title track of this album will be, "This is it."
Yeah, and I'm not really at all familiar with his first album, except to the extent that it's represented in Songs from the Attic,
Oh, well, right.
which is just an amazing live album
Which I
and
think, yeah, it is fantastic.
fantastic. Yeah, and so that you get some exposure to the
Right.
early stuff on that, and you realize, oh, it was already like really good from the beginning. So there
Yeah,
you
I
go.
think, yeah. And those people who loved Billy Joel early knew they were onto something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the 16th, Bette Midler came out with her second studio album, eponymous, and produced by Arif Mardin and
Oh, oh.
I know you know this.
Well, is this Manilow?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Barry
Okay.
Manilow.
Manilow. Yeah, who had been her musical director for some time.
Exactly right. Also on the 16th, Mind Games came out. Speaking of former Beatles,
Mind
uh,
Games.
and this was
Yeah,
Lennon's fourth solo album.
that's a lot.
Already his fourth solo.
It's only 1973 after all.
Yeah, but uh, he had a method of working that sometimes was just breakneck.
Yeah.
Stuff, write it, sing it, publish it, boom, 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 and
Boom, boom, boom.
so
Yeah, and
yeah,
perhaps
if you work like that,
would have been well served to slow that process down a little.
maybe. But I
I
think he
mean,
was lucky to get this in before the long weekend started.
yeah, I mean, his life is, I mean, yeah, that's true. I mean, his life is, personal life is in kind of free fall.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
We had of course, the green card problems, and
oh yeah,
this is around the time when the separation from Yoko started. He started hanging out with Harry Nilsson,
and he's an enormously public figure. He would just spend, well, I mean, he'd spend time. It was quite famous. He just, in New York, he would just he'd walk, take the subway, go to restaurants. I mean, you had a reasonable chance if you were in Manhattan of running into Lennon. I mean, it's because he was just out and about. Now, in the end, of course, that was incredibly problematic for him. But he just
incredibly problematic. Yes, that's an interesting way to say it.
well, okay, lethal. I mean, it was
Yeah.
it ended up terribly for him.
Yeah.
But he was, God, he was about, I mean, alongside somebody like Muhammad Ali, it's like one of the most famous people on planet Earth.
Yeah.
It's just like Mike. I mean, probably, I mean, maybe even more famous than any of the other Beatles. I mean, there was something about him. It was just like Lennon.
But you look at the other end of the spectrum, like the Howard Hughes syndrome.
Oh yeah. Oh well. God.
Well, which way is better to live? I think, for me, no argument. Be accessible. Don't shut yourself in. Get out there and let the people.
Well, I
have their.
Well, you like to think. I mean, you'd like to think that there's something in the middle, but yeah, Howard Hughes, well, that's one of the, well, that was off the rails. There might have been some other things at work there, but I mean, I'm not. But your point,
pathological.
But your point's well taken, though. I'm not trying to. Yeah, I mean, I got you. Yeah. Lennon knew what he was doing.
Mind Games was the first of his solo efforts that was not produced by Phil Spector. He produced it himself. Had
that
some
was
of
a good
this,
move.
The political material that some people found abrasive was still on Mind Games, but some people loved that stuff. You know, I mean, it was a political time.
It was, and people saw him as a kind of leader in this regard. I mean, he was a kind of consensus builder, and people really, you know, what did Lennon have to say about this issue? I mean, he was seen in that light, but it doesn't hold up very well. I mean, I hear you.
On the 20th, Muscle of Love, the final studio album by the Alice Cooper Band.
Yeah, they had kind of, you talk about living hard. Yeah, so there are a couple of really good cuts on that. I don't even think that Bob Ezrin makes it through the whole session. I'm not sure he even, well, anyway, they are on fumes at this point. Well, maybe think of a different way of saying that, but they, you know,
well, maybe literally.
But you know, it won't be the last we hear from Alice Cooper, you know, the figure who has a kind of renaissance, an interesting renaissance, mid 70s, where he becomes, you know, a kind of balladeer. Those are really good songs. But that first group,
his ballads are incredible. Yeah.
But the original Alice Cooper group, this is it for them.
Also in November, John Denver's Greatest Hits. This is 1973, and he's already put out his greatest hits. I owned this as an 8-track at some point.
Yeah, you and lots of other people.
And my impression was that it was like mid 70s or something. I mean, you know, he hadn't been producing great hits for that long.
No, but he did have, you know, he did sneak a couple in the late 60s and very, very early 70s, you know, Pumps, Pears, and Promises and Country Roads and all that.
Plane.
Yeah, Jet Plane. So
it's on this.
But it's he was rolling. I mean, you know, he was never
a good album.
It's a good album. Yeah, it's a good album.
It went platinum. It was one of the first albums, in fact, worldwide to sell over 10 million copies. So it's like 9 times platinum. And
I mean, Denver was one of those people that, I mean, appealed to a broad audience, and it's the kind of thing that if your parents heard it, you know, oh, I like that John Denver, you know. Yeah.
Yes.
You know,
was not he had a very clean image. Which he also brought across on the big screen in a number of acting roles.
Well, yeah, the whole "Oh God" thing.
Yes,
you know, he had
with George Burns.
Burns, yeah, and he's had several Muppet projects
or Christmas specials or whatever. He was really variety show.
Well, he was right.
The perfect material for variety shows.
He really was, and he made himself into a kind of entertainment titan in a way in the 70s. I mean, the acting thing was significant for him.
Also in November, Nutbush City Limits came out, and obviously that was a big thing. Critically very successful, and Nutbush City Limits was I think by far the biggest hit that Tina Turner herself ever wrote.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right.
And last thing in November, last music news, The Who opened their Quadrophenia tour with a concert at San Francisco's Cow Palace. Where Keith Moon passed out
Yeah, that's right.
on stage.
This is the infamous animal tranquilizer story,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
elephant tranquilizer or something, right?
just
Yeah. So he's out.
incredible. Yeah, and Allison kind of passes it off with a joke and says, "Do we have any volunteers in the audience?" And in fact, a 19-year-old kid, one of the fans,
Yes.
Scott Halpin, came up and finished the show in Moon's place.
Yeah, and Halpin in the rock lore enters some sort of kind of storied. Halpin's still alive, lives in Iowa,
Oh
and
wow!
yeah, it was really something. But I think it gave some insight into uh, Keith Moon, who would not be long for this earth.
Well, it's amazing if you considering this incident alone, um, the fact that he made it a number of years
Oh, it's
past
true.
that.
No, it's really true.
So
It really and the whole Quadrophenia experience, that tour in particular, was as they say, difficult and not necessarily well received. I mean,
mm,
so
when we talk about the Lost Weekend, Keith Moon was one of the people who was often accompanying, was one of the
well,
companions of
well,
William during
and
his.
that's right. It's so, and there you also oftentimes found one Alice Cooper as well, and so it's yeah, if Keith Moon is in your traveling party, that's probably a sign.
It's probably a sign that you may be on the edge.
Oh my! I had no idea things were this bad. I mean, Moon's.
Wait, Keith Moon's here. We probably should leave.
This is. I mean, honestly, that's right.
Yeah, he was crazy. He was nuts.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, he was.
But yeah, living it to the limit, right?
I think that's it. Yeah,
that was the program. Okay,
yeah.
that was
So
November.
all right. So in December of '73, change of pace here a little bit. On December 3rd, it had been launched a couple of years earlier, but you mentioned a moment ago deep space probes from NASA. On November 3rd, Pioneer 10 sent the first close-up images of Jupiter. And this was, well, I mean, as you might imagine, this was quite an exciting event. And what's interesting about these deep space probes is that, well, they went on and on and on. The last signal received from Pioneer 10 was in 2003. I mean, it's really quite remarkable. And so in terms of sort of bang for the buck, I think it's hard to argue against the deep space probes. They never caught the public's imagination in the way that manned space did. I mean, we get that, but they really were remarkable.
Well, I think from a scientist's point of view, much more valuable than
I think
any moonshots.
Yeah. I think I think that's absolutely the case. And so, oh yeah, so on the 11th, you remember this. On the 11th, the American Revolution Bicentennial Administration was created by the Nixon administration. They were there to coordinate the bicentennial activities in 1976. And so this logo became ubiquitous across the United States, really from that point on. And the bicentennial, I think by almost any measure, was a roaring success. I think Americans were ready for, they were ready for something to be positive about.
Some feel good stuff, yeah.
Yes, and there was plenty of it with the bicentennial, and it's surprising. We're both obviously history buffs. It was surprising in that Americans demonstrated, at least for a short time, a real appetite for history. Amongst the things that took place then were the so-called bicentennial minutes, launched by CBS early in 1974, and just again an overall kind of appreciation for that Revolutionary War era. And so
it was the movie 1776.
that was, you're right.
Enjoyed great popularity. A musical.
Yes, it's one of the strangest kind of concepts. Oh, here, I got an idea. But it really works. And
Yes, we'll take a look at the convention that drafted the Declaration of Independence.
I mean,
and make a musical out of it.
It sounds like something that Mel Brooks would, suggest. Now, here's what we're going to do. But it's
we need to have a tax write-off.
Well, that's it. I mean, this is where, yeah, that's exactly it. But it really works. The bicentennial, people who were alive during that have real fond memories of it. It's there was something about it that made people excited. We are on the precipice of the 250th anniversary of the America's founding. There's a little less energy for that. I guess 250 doesn't have quite the same cachet as 200. I don't know.
Well, but, I think the other problem is that there are a couple of different camps that are going to spin this in their own particular way. You're not going to have the same unified type of feeling and feel for the significance. The significance is going to be kind of up for grabs, I think.
I think that's fair. No, I think that's right. Well, so on the 15th of December, a fairly groundbreaking moment happened when the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from the DSM-2, which had before classified homosexuality as a mental illness. And this is this was quite a bold move, and it also, I think, was again another kind of milepost in terms of the notion of changing views of gay Americans. And it is, I think, alongside something like Stonewall in these early years, something that the gay Americans really looked to as an incredibly positive development. And I think it's fair to say that the APA was way ahead of most of the American public in this regard. But this was a big deal. This was
and not even all psychologists were on board.
Well, that's right. That's right.
I think the majority, but not there was a significant minority that did not sign on, and
yeah, that's true.
But this is really I think it's hard to overestimate the value of this. Just two decades earlier, homosexuals were being put into institutions.
That's right.
Lobotomized.
That's right.
Stuff like that. So it's in 2 decades that the view, the psychological view has really made huge progress, and that was very important.
It's a seismic shift in that regard for sure. Yeah. On the 16th of December, on a snowy field in New York City, the running back for the Buffalo Bills, one O.J. Simpson, completed sort of the miraculous achievement of gaining 2,003 yards in a 14-game season, smashing the previous yardage record and setting up what was believed to be sort of an unbeatable kind of record. It's Simpson at this time was becoming more than simply a kind of football player, because he was already branching out into advertising and becoming a really quite a well-known pitchman. And Simpson sort of transcended sports in a way. He was really one of the more familiar faces in American life. Of course, this all comes crashing down around him a few decades later. But there was a time when O.J. Simpson was an incredible athlete, running back specifically. And it was an icon. I mean, it was considered, people were talking about Simpson as being sort of the greatest football player of all time in this era. And it would be kind of hard to argue against that. But then, of course, how things have changed for him.
I wonder how his
not that
investigation is coming along.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, there's no one more unsympathetic than O.J. Simpson. I mean, it's really quite. I mean,
but back
grace.
then he was really well loved. He was a good-looking guy. He was photogenic.
Well, yeah, I mean that's
kind of
right.
Had a Joe Namath type of appeal.
He did, and the reason that Hertz and all these companies would put Simpson at the front is because he had this high kind of Q rating, right? People responded positively to him, and again, that's what makes the events in Brentwood. Well, that's one of the things that made it so jarring. It's hard to believe, but and then on the 28th, I have one more thing to hear. I know you got some stuff on the 28th. Again, Nixon can walk and chew gum at the same time, and on the 28th, Nixon signs the Endangered Species Act, which was a kind of groundbreaking measure in the environmental movement to protect a species who were on the verge of extinction. And Nixon, for all his faults, was as progressive an American president in terms of environmental matters as we had ever seen.
He certainly was, yeah.
And I think you can argue that, I mean, he's in the conversation for the most progressive American president in terms of the environment of all time. And
and he was going against some strong headwinds from his own party there.
You got that right.
Because anything that regulates what business can or cannot do with the environment is anti-business, right? And that's
no question.
That's no good. So we can't log here because of some little bird?
Well, I know this is that sort of thing. It is the political piece of it. Again, Nixon is a political animal. The political piece of it is a little curious, although Nixon was always looking to extend the olive branch to a wide variety of constituencies. But that law, of course, would become remarkably controversial, and parts of the law have been repealed. But it was a bold move, to say the least. What else is going down in December of '73?
Well, in movie news, we have the release of The Sting, December 25th. This was the second vehicle for the Robert Redford, Paul Newman pairing.
And the last.
Yeah. But they were both successful. And this also had some consequences for, there was a little bit of a revival for ragtime.
That's
music.
Well, that's right. That's exactly how I would put it as well. Kind of revival, a rediscovery of Scott Joplin, for example. Yeah. Yes,
exactly. And so that one went on. The next day, The Exorcist came out. It was released in 30 theaters nationwide, and there were long lines. And it became an incredible success because word of mouth just made it.
That's right.
Yeah, it was.
That's right.
Exceptionally disturbing.
That's right.
And you had people going there, and they would break down in tears. They would faint. They would vomit. And you have the people with strong stomachs that say, I need to see this. And so, yeah, they really, and it also had its impact on the music scene because, of course, the soundtrack straight off of Tubular Bells.
Tubular Bells.
And Mike Oldfield certainly enjoyed. Well, this was his main success, right?
This is what he'll probably forever be known for. But isn't it interesting that you couldn't have two more different movies, you couldn't have two more different soundtracks or themes, but both were enormously popular. you know, the public wanted to hear both. I mean, that's one of the things that makes the 70s so interesting, is that
Yeah, that
you'd have Marvin Hamlish's version of Scott Joplin's, you know, Maple Leaf Rag alongside like Tubular Bells. It's like, but yeah, I mean, in the 70s, it sort of made sense.
lot going on musically in December. On the 7th, we had Band on the Run, the third solo attempt. Well, solo. Paul McCartney and Wings, their third album,
right.
and that was released on the 30th. Sorry, on the 7th. Tales from Topographic Oceans. Yes's
Well,
studio album was
if
released.
you like, right, if you like Yes, this is the album for you, right? The enormous, I mean, sidelong cuts. Yes, at either their most indulgent or most ambitious or both. I mean, this is, I mean, right. It's classic.
It was yes,
it's
it was a
concept,
concept album, but you really need to do a deep dive into new age type of thinking to get the concept.
I think that's fair. Back to Band on the Run for a second. I mean, this is probably McCartney's, well, right, this is best non-Beatles album, right? I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
I mean,
yeah.
And this is again an album that was born from sessions in Nigeria at the MI studio in Lagos, and they were robbed and lost the tape. And I mean, there's a whole lot that went into it, but there was something about Band on the Run, that song in particular, that really, I think, was reminiscent of McCartney at his best in the Beatles. And I think this is where Wings, whatever Wings was or is, I mean, that's where they really picked up their momentum. Band on the Run, that was sort of the starting gun for McCartney's solo career.
And I think probably also the most memorable cover.
Isn't that interesting? You're right. Yeah, I remember being baffled by the cover because I recognized people on the cover.
Oh yeah,
that weren't on in the band, and it just took, James Coburn is on the cover.
Christopher Lee.
Yeah, yes, Michael Parkinson, who I didn't know at the time, but I mean, there's all sorts of, it's this Hen and Hair, all sorts of, so yeah, terrific album.
Yeah. Brain Salad Surgery also came out on December 7th.
If you want some ELP, that's I have to admit, I'm a fan.
Well, hey,
let's just give it to me. Just give it to me. Here we go.
Emerson, Lake and Palmer just no, it's just
it
just kind of stayed under my radar.
They're bombastic with a capital B, but there's parts of that album, parts of it are just incredible. But yeah, it's a lot of ELP.
What else? CBGB opened on December 10th in Manhattan.
You could make a case, right, that CBGB's becomes one of the most important clubs in the history of popular music. I mean, alongside, Doug Weston's The Troubadour, and you mentioned the Roxy earlier. I mean, CBGB's in the 70s is there's no place more important.
Punk, New Age, anything. The Ramones, Blondie, Patti Smith,
Talking Heads, television. I mean, just goes on and on, right?
They all got their start playing at CBGB, and it's So you're absolutely right. A very, very influential, dirty little club.
Dirty little club. I mean, as apparently that, like, the just almost beyond belief dirty, but
and little.
Yeah.
So amazing. If you hear about CBGB and you have some sort of idea of its significance in rock history, and then you were to go there and experience it, it would just, I think that would blow most people's minds.
It would be very jarring. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, on the 15th, Tremaine Jackson married Hazel Gordy, the daughter of Barry.
This is what happens.
So
What happens.
You could think a continuation of a dynasty. It didn't really work out that way, but
it didn't. But right. Crazy kids in love. What are you going to do?
21st, Riding the Storm Out, REO Speedwagon's third studio album. And referring to a harsh winter blizzard after a show in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah, so the quintessential version of that, right, it's off a live album or live version. Yes. Yeah. But you and I both, I think, have a soft spot for REO. And
yes, that, and especially from this period. I like the earlier REO
me too.
More than what comes later.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
Bachman Turner Overdrive 2 comes out in December, which includes their Taking Care of Business single. And the album never cracked the top 10 in the US singles charts, but it did reach number 12.
Yeah,
in 74.
BTO, I mean, so Randy Bachman, he has this career in the Guess Who, of course, and then BTO, in a way, almost eclipses it in the US. Neil Young points to Randy Bachman as the most influential guitarist he ever encountered as a young person.
Wow.
That he thought that he was just enamored with the way that Bachman played. And
that's saying something. It's high praise indeed.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah.
I Got a Name came out, which of course is
just more sadness. Yeah.
Album from Jim Croce. I'll have to say I Love You in a Song was released as a single. Yeah, all right. Yeah,
I'm not
going to break a lance for that.
I'm not.
But I think it's a perfectly good.
It's perfectly fine. Yeah, it's perfectly fine.
On the 31st, brothers Malcolm and Angus perform under the name AC/DC at the former city nightclub Checkers for its New Year's Eve party. And the second annual New Year's Rockin' Eve airs on NBC with performances by Tower of Power, Billy Preston, and the Pointer Sisters.
That's a pretty good lineup. I mean, I think that's the Dick Clark thing, which is always became lamer and lamer, but that's a pretty good lineup. Nothing wrong with
lamer and lamer, but
lamer and lamer.
It had legs, that.
Well, yeah,
it was well into the 2000s.
Well, for sure.
Before that reached its end.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't even reach its end, or was Dick Clark simply replaced? I think they still do it, don't they?
I think they still do it. Dick Clark was replaced, of course, and he's passed now. But yeah, I think maybe it still exists in some form.
So there you go. That's our year's wrap up.
That's quite a year.
23.
Yeah, I mean,
2023, 50 years ago, 1973.
That's right. As tumultuous as 1973 was politically in the United States, 74 might be even more tumultuous because 74 is obviously an enormously significant year for one Richard Nixon. But musically, 74 is fascinating as well. So, there's just something about this era that it's a kind of golden era, I think.
You think about it, one thing is a huge relief that Vietnam is over. The other thing is there's just a huge disillusionment about what type of people occupy the White House. And that, I think, leads to the hedonism that we see in the 70s after.
I think you're absolutely right. And one of the things that's so interesting about 74 is that we get, disco. The proto-disco songs emerge. You have disco clubs opening up in New York City, for example, and hedonism. Well, yeah. So we're heading in an interesting direction, starting in 74.
1974, another interesting year that we'll be looking at month for month coming up. And until then, if you enjoyed this video, and we hope you did, then give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can do that right here. You can watch one of our 50 years ago this month videos right here. And you'll definitely want to check out the playlist this time. The best music of 1973 right there.
You got it. We tweet every day. Stephen Dave's one, and just we really enjoy that. We hope that you check those out as well. So until next time, we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.